Hello, dear listener. Today I want to invite you to an honest and calm conversation about something that sometimes seems obvious, but in fact requires a lot of inner work from us, parents. We will talk about how our comparison of a child with other children can affect his self-esteem, inner support, and trust in us. And most importantly, what can be done to strengthen, not destroy, his faith in himself and in us. Let's start with a simple question. How many times in our lives have we heard or said ourselves, "Look how hard your sister is trying. Why can't you do the same?" Or, "There's a boy next door. He's an excellent student. He plays sports and you." Such words often seem motivating, but they leave scars deeper than we think. After all, a child does not hear a call to become better. He hears, "You are not the way I want you to be." As Alfred Adler, one of the founders of individual psychology, said, "Comparison kills uniqueness." We adults forget that every child comes into this world with their own temperament, their own strengths and weaknesses, their own rhythm of development. Comparing them with others, we seem to erase this uniqueness. Why do we want to compare so much? This is also part of our experience. We ourselves were compared. We were taught to think that better and worse are measured by the successes of others. Perhaps you yourself heard in childhood, "Well, your sister always cleans up after herself." Or, "Why can't you be as diligent as your brother?" Seemingly harmless words, but it is in them that the same old habit of comparing our own children is hidden. Why do we do this? Often, without even realizing it. Psychologists say that in any family, its own roles are formed. The eldest is responsible, the youngest is spoilt or dreamer. The middle one often imperceptibly tries to be needed and convenient. In fact, we adults ourselves reinforce these scenarios by comparing their achievements and weaknesses. And thus, we unwittingly push children to compete for attention, for love, for the right to be better. The famous family psychotherapist Virginia Satter said, "By comparing children, parents sow the seeds of jealousy, which can grow into mistrust for life." Indeed, such invisible shoots often later prevent brothers and sisters from being a real support for each other. At first, these are minor grievances. Again, you were allowed more, you were always the favorite. And then, a cold distance already in adulthood. But if you think deeper, behind the comparison often lies parental fear. Will one of the children turn out to be worse? Will it turn out that we did not give enough to one somewhere? So this phrase is sometimes heard to spur, but the child hears it completely differently. "I am worse. I am loved less." This is how an internal burden is laid. To recognize this scenario means to start changing the habit. After all, every child comes into this world with different temperaments, abilities, and dreams. And our task as parents is not to put them in the same line, but to learn to see their uniqueness. Then brothers and sisters will be able to grow together, knowing that they are valued not for comparison, but for who they really are. How the parental role changes as the child ages. The parental role is a living process that is constantly transforming along with the growth and development of the child. What seems obvious and important in early childhood gradually gives way to new forms of interaction and perception over time. Understanding how the parental role changes as the child ages helps parents not only maintain a connection with their children, but also develop themselves, avoiding the traps of control and comparison that can destroy relationships. In the first years of a child's life, a parent is, first and foremost, a keeper, protector, and source of security. There's a lot of care, direct control, and strict boundaries necessary to form a basic sense of security. But with age, especially starting from adolescence, a natural shift occurs. The child gradually strives for independence, forms his own views and values, which causes anxiety in parents and sometimes a desire to maintain control. Here there is often a danger of getting stuck in a model where the parent continues to compare his adult child with others, peers, friends, colleagues. This comparison can turn into a source of constant tension, a challenge to the child's self-esteem, and even destroy trust. As noted by the famous psychologist Erik Erikson, at the stage of maturity, youth and adulthood, it is important to support the child's autonomy and recognize his uniqueness. rather than imposing patterns of success. Over time, control gradually gives way to partnership. The parent becomes not only a mentor, but also a friend, a conversationalist who is ready to listen and support. Such a change in roles requires the adult to be able to let go of the illusion of complete influence and accept the child as he is, with all his characteristics and choices. This is not always easy, because the habit of controlling and comparing is deeply rooted in the minds of many parents. The psychological mechanisms of this transformation are associated with the development of the child's personality boundaries and a rethinking of parental responsibility. The parental I changes from a sense of guardianship to the role of support and acceptance. In this dynamic, it is important to maintain internal flexibility, learn to let go and trust, which gives space for growth and mutual respect. Such a transition is both a challenge and an opportunity for both generations. Parents must learn to listen, understand the motivations and feelings of an adult child, and children must recognize the experience and care of their parents. At the same time, the quality of closeness changes. It becomes more mature, conscious, based on mutual respect, and not fear or a sense of duty. It is precisely the frozen scenarios that should be avoided, when the parent tries to maintain control, not noticing the changing needs of the child, or when comparison becomes a measure of value. Such approaches can lead to alienation, internal conflicts, and a breakdown in relationships. Therefore, it is important, 1, to realize that the role of the parent is changing, and this is a natural process. 2, to learn to accept an adult child with his or her choices and characteristics. 3, to refuse comparisons that harm trust and self-esteem. 4, to build relationships based on dialogue, partnership, and respect. 5, to support the independence and inner strength of the child. 6, to work on one's own flexibility and readiness for change. Understanding these changes helps parents to maintain closeness with their children, to become a support for them, and not a source of tension. This is the path not only to harmonious relationships, but also to the personal growth of the parent himself or herself, who learns to accept changes and becomes wiser together with their child. How to talk about others without comparison. Often parents want to push their child to develop or be disciplined. And the usual formula sounds like this: look how others are trying. Petty can do it, but you can't. But this approach rarely helps. It leaves the child alone with a feeling of shame or envy. But you can talk about other people's examples differently, without putting them like a ruler, but showing that success is possible for him too. What can you say instead of the usual, look how others are doing? Instead of comparison, an emphasis on inspiration. I like how your friend is so calm about failures. What do you think about this? Maybe some of this will help you. Instead of reproach, a partner question. What would you like to try next time? What do you think would work better? Instead of pressure, praise for your steps. I see that it's not easy for you, but you didn't give up. That's really great. Let's think about what else can help you. Such a dialogue removes me versus you and allows the child to feel not worse than someone else, but as a person who is growing and can choose what to learn from others. After all, real examples are needed, but not in the form of competition, but as a field of opportunities. You can talk about people without edifying. Instead of, your sister is a better student, say, I see that everyone has their own pace. You are learning persistence, and she is learning speed. And that's normal. A simple phrase, but it relieves unnecessary tension. It is also useful to remember your own example. Children look at us. Do we notice our mistakes? Do we praise ourselves for small victories? If we know how to be inspired by others without devaluing ourselves, the child adopts this healthy support. Let your words become for him not a platform for assessments, but a quiet haven where you can grow without the fear of being worse than someone else. When is comparison appropriate? Of course, the topic of comparison is one of the most subtle and complex in a relationship between parents and children. Often it seems to us that any comparison is only pressure and harm, but it is worth looking deeper. Healthy comparison is not a comparison with others, but a comparison of yourself with yourself yesterday, last year. Imagine a child learning to ride a bike. He may stumble, fall, but each new day is a little more confident, a little longer. This is where the value of comparison is, to see your progress, to understand how far you have gone from your previous level. This is not a race with a neighbor's boy, but a competition with your own yesterday's I. Psychologists note that this approach forms sustainable motivation and internal support. When a child notices, "I did better today than yesterday," it brings joy and strengthens self-confidence. In this sense, comparison is an engine of growth, not a source of anxiety and uncertainty. For such a comparison to be healthy, it is important for parents to help the child see their own achievements, not other successes. For example, instead of "look how well Petya is doing," it is better to say, "You handle the task much more confidently today than last time." This helps to switch attention from external standards to internal progress. It is also useful to record small victories together with the child. Keep a diary of successes. Note what new things he has mastered, what he did better. This helps to see that development is a process, not an instant comparison with others. Thus, a healthy comparison is not "who is better," but "who am I today?" This is the basis for developing strong self-esteem and love for the learning process, without which true growth and happiness are impossible. What consequences does comparison have for a child? In the moment and after, sometimes a parent thinks, "What's so bad if I say a couple of times, 'Look how others are trying'?" But such words rarely pass without a trace, especially if they sound often and become the background of childhood. In the short term, a child can begin to try for the sake of an assessment, for the sake of praise, to be no worse. But deep down, something else grows, the fear that if he does not live up to the expectations, love will disappear. Gradually, comparison becomes an inner voice. Even in adulthood, a person can look at colleagues, friends, neighbors, and constantly look for where he falls short. Self-esteem turns out to be not his own, but tied to others. And even successes seem unworthy because there will always be someone faster, smarter, better. Often children who are constantly compared learn to hide their true dreams and talents. Why talk about how you like to draw if your mother expects a medal in math because the neighbor's son could do it? Sometimes this leads to the child choosing friends who are not their own, just to fit the image of the ideal. Or, on the contrary, they distance themselves, withdraw into themselves, and are afraid to open up. Comparison not only hits self-esteem, but also teaches the child to evaluate others through the same prism. Growing up, they can become strict with themselves and their loved ones, unable to enjoy their own steps without looking back. Adult life, where every step is compared with someone else's steps, rarely brings satisfaction. It is important to remember, children are sensitive not only to words, but also to looks, tone, and pauses. Sometimes even a silent or sigh tells a child, "You could do better," and they can carry this invisible baggage for years, gradually losing the courage to be themselves. The role of a parent is not just a set of responsibilities. It is a living process in which feelings, expectations, and reality are constantly intertwined. Often, in this complex dynamic, a habit of comparing a child with others appears, be it peers, siblings, friends. At first glance, this may seem natural and even useful because we want our children to grow up successful and happy. But if you dig deeper, it becomes clear. Comparisons carry many hidden risks and psychological traps that can destroy relationships and harm both the child and the parent. Why do we compare? Often, this is due to internal fear and anxiety. Fear that the child will fall behind, not fit in with society, or will not achieve what we ourselves would like. The psychological mechanism here is very simple. We're trying to control the child's future through the standards set by external standards. But this control is illusory and often counterproductive. As Carl Rogers, a famous humanist psychologist, wrote, "Each person is unique, and true growth is possible only when we accept others as they are, rather than trying to fit them into someone else's framework." For a child, constant comparisons are a source of internal conflict and low self-esteem. He begins to feel that he is valued, not for who he is, but for his achievements that meet other people's expectations. This gives rise to a feeling of anxiety, insecurity, and alienation. At the same time, parents, constantly comparing, often experience a feeling of guilt and disappointment because reality does not coincide with their ideals. A parent's perspective helps us understand that comparisons are not only about the child, but also about our own fears and expectations. Here are some questions that will help you understand your feelings more deeply. 1. What do I feel when I compare my child? 2. What am I afraid of when I watch his successes and failures? 3. What am I really proud of in my child? 4. How do I want him to feel around me? 5. Which of my expectations are fair, and which are imposed by society or internal beliefs? The answers to these questions can be the first step to awareness and change. Instead of controlling your child through comparisons, you can focus on his unique talents, interests, and pace of development. Instead of competing with others, support your child as an individual who develops at his own pace and finds his own path. Attention, love, and acceptance are what provide real support for growth and confidence. Ultimately, giving up comparisons does not mean lowering your standards or being indifferent. This means moving from external standards to internal respect and understanding, which help build trusting relationships and support healthy development. Parental emotional burnout. Emotional burnout is a topic that parents rarely talk about out loud, but it is often hidden behind excessive control, endless comparisons, and anxiety for the child's future. The paradox is that the parent is trying to keep everything under control, not because of rigidity, but because of internal fatigue and fear of losing what is important. Constant tension, worries, doubts, all this imperceptibly depletes mental strength. This condition is often called silent burnout. The parent continues to act with all his might, but irritation and resentment accumulate inside, and this affects the relationship with the child. Psychologists emphasize it is impossible to be a reliable support for another if you yourself are empty inside. It is like trying to drink from an empty jug. It is important to recognize the first signs: chronic fatigue, apathy, outbursts of anger for no apparent reason, the feeling that nothing is changing. When you notice such states in yourself, do not blame yourself. Instead, ask the question, what can I do to recover? Where are the boundaries that I can set to leave time for myself? With whom can I share responsibility and worries? Eastern wisdom teaches, when your cup is full, you can give water to others. It is important for a parent to fill themselves with care, rest, support from loved ones, conversations with those who understand. Sometimes it is worth revising expectations from a child. Not everything can be foreseen and controlled. Taking care of yourself is not selfishness, but wisdom. After all, it depends on the inner strength of the parent whether the family will be a space of warmth and mutual understanding or an arena of fatigue and resentment. Let this question become a reminder. Caring for a child is impossible without caring for yourself. Silent messages, body language, and home atmosphere. Sometimes it seems to us that words decide everything. It is enough to explain correctly that you love and support, and the child will understand everything. But the atmosphere in the family is formed not only by what we say, but also by what remains between the lines. Silent messages are our looks, intonations, sighs, even pauses, which are more eloquent than any phrases. Sometimes parents are surprised, but I never said that I wanted another child. Why does he think so? Because a look full of discontent or a tired "so what is this?" without words speaks louder than any explanation. The child catches these signals instantly. He feels tension, senses uncertainty, guesses about hidden resentment or disappointment. Psychologists note body language, facial expressions, tone, and even the general background at home are an invisible textbook by which a child learns to understand what is expected of him. And here a parent should be attentive not to other people's words, but to their own gestures. For example, have you noticed that in a difficult moment, you can turn away instead of hugging? Or you say warm words, but your eyes are full of anxiety and condemnation? These little things are remembered for a long time. What can be done? Try paying attention to this silent dialogue. How do you look at your child when he tells you something important? Is there sincere interest in this look, or are you already thinking about other problems? How does your silence sound? Like a cold wall or an invitation to be close? Silent messages are a thin thread from which trust is woven day after day. It is important to remember, a child learns not only from your words, but also from your reactions. Sometimes it is worth talking less, but hugging more often. Less instruction, but more attentive listening. And then the atmosphere at home becomes a place where you can be yourself without fear of not living up to silent expectations. What can help a parent stop involuntarily comparing? Here are some simple tips. 1. Notice your child's unique strengths. Even if they are not so obvious to the world, this is their peculiarity. 2. Learn to talk about specific successes. Not "you are the best, but I like how you did it yourself." 3. If you catch yourself comparing, stop. Ask, what am I feeling? What am I afraid of? Why is it important for me that he be like someone else? 4. Maintain an open dialogue. When a child feels that he is valued unconditionally, he is more open to advice. 5. Remember, you are children yourself, and you probably know how painful it is to hear that you are worse than someone else. Do not repeat this scenario. This is what adult parenting is. Not to mold an ideal, but to accompany a person along his path. To be there where he needs to lend a shoulder, and to step aside in time, giving freedom. Final reminder, the power of trust. Ultimately, what is it that becomes the foundation of the relationship between parent and child? Not perfect control or flawless execution of all the rules, but the power of trust, a fragile but powerful foundation on which the entire family connection is built. Trust is like an invisible thread that connects hearts, allowing you to feel safe even when storms rage around. Imagine a ship on the high seas. No navigation rules will save you if the crew does not trust the captain. In the same way, a child who feels trust is ready to go into the unknown, try, make mistakes, and get up again. This does not mean the absence of boundaries. It means that boundaries do not become shackles, but serve as a support to lean on. When parents try to control every movement, every step of the child, they sometimes unintentionally create an atmosphere of fear in which natural curiosity turns into caution and sincerity into secrecy. Trust gives birth to the freedom to be yourself, the openness to share thoughts and feelings, even if they do not coincide with the expectations of adults. Psychologist Carl Rogers spoke about the importance of unconditional positive acceptance. That is, accepting a child as he is, with all the mistakes and successes. It is like sunlight that gives strength to grow. Without this luminary, even the best advice loses its power, and the words of parents become only an echo of demands. The power of trust is the ability to listen not only to words, but also to silence, to see not only successes, but also fears, to accept not only bright achievements, but also the shadows of failures. When a child knows that he is not alone in his experiences, he learns to trust himself and others. What does it mean to create this atmosphere of trust? It is not about becoming an ideal parent, but about being there, attentive, patient, ready to understand, and not to judge. This means giving your child the right to make mistakes, not punishing them for their feelings, not giving ultimatums, but saying, "I'm with you" instead of "you should." This is the power of trust. It doesn't make us perfect, but makes our relationships alive, real, and strong. This is where we should strive when it seems like everything around us is falling apart. After all, trust is not an endpoint, but a path that we choose to walk together every day. Let's not become a source of eternal comparison and a race for someone else's success for our children. Let them grow up understanding that for us, they're not a project or a list of achievements, but people whom we love for who they are. And now I would like to hear your opinion. What do you think about comparing children? Maybe you have your own stories? Share them in the comments. After all, only together, exchanging experiences, we learn to be parents who don't break, but support. Thank you for being here, and see you in new videos.